So Jennifer had gotten pregnant by Steve, didn't tell Steve, told Bob. So Bob and Jennifer got married, and neither one of them told Steve, but they both knew the truth.
Evil.
And they went ahead and Bob signed the birth certificate. Well, Steve found out. He found out about 3 years later. The child started looking a lot like Steve. Some of Steve's friends and some of Jennifer's friends that they had in common told Steve about it. So he inquired and sure enough found out that that was his biological child.
Yo, what's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Coffee Pod. My name is Tisha Zed.
Drink the coffee, it'll make you feel better.
So guys, this is Divorce Horror Stories Part 2. Let's get into it.
Mom and Dad were the unmarried parents of a 5-year-old little boy. They lived together the first year of the child's life and then they separated. They entered into an agreement that they wrote out and both signed, giving Dad every other weekend. He exercised his parenting time religiously, didn't miss a single weekend. Mom decides after the child turns 5 that she's going to move to Florida, so she ups and moves. Doesn't tell Dad until she gets down there.
Terrible.
Calls him up and says, hey, by the way, I moved to Florida. Sorry. Well, Dad goes down to court and asks the judge to issue an order ordering Mom to come back with the child. Well, the judge says, have you got anything giving you parenting time? He says, yeah, I got a written agreement. We both signed it. Judge says, yeah, but is it an order from the court? Did the court sign it?
Free
Dad
game.
says, no. Judge says, did you establish paternity? He said, well, I signed the birth certificate. Judge says, is there an order establishing paternity? Father says, no. Judge says, sorry, nothing I can do. Point here is that if you're a father, especially in Tennessee, you've got to have an order establishing paternity before you can have rights to your child.
Over $19 million is what it cost Frank and Jamie McCourt in attorney fees to get divorced over a decade ago. He was worth a lot of money, owned the Dodgers at the time, worth several $100 million. So that didn't seem like a lot to them, but that is a lot of money in attorney fees. Most divorces that I'm aware of, even if they're contested, cost several $1,000s at least, and they can go up a lot higher than that. You know, there are a lot of things you can do to cut down on the attorney fees and the cost of your divorce case. One of the things you can do is limit the number of phone calls you make to your attorney. The best thing you can do, though, is to try to work out every single thing you possibly can with your spouse. That way the attorneys don't have much to fight about, really. Another thing you can do is if you have a bunch of financial documents, don't just give them to your attorney and expect him or her to go through them. Go through them yourself and try to put them all in a spreadsheet. That saves a lot of time. There are a lot of things you can do like that to save on attorney fees in divorce. Step-parents have absolutely no rights to their stepchildren. Case in point, a few years ago, a mother allowed her new husband, the stepfather of a child, to corporally punish a child. Well, the father found out about it and was absolutely livid. He filed a petition in court with his lawyer asking that the court remove that step-parent from that child's life until there could be a full hearing.
Wow.
The court agreed and removed the step-parent from the child's life initially and then held a full hearing. And at that hearing, the court determined that that step-parent posed such a risk of harm to the child by corporally punishing the child that he should never be around that child again. That caused some real problems between the mother and the stepfather.
Date a single mother if you want.
Mom eventually divorced the stepfather so that she could have a normal relationship.
She will always put the family first.
The court said in its ruling that step-parents have no constitutional or statutory rights to their stepchildren.
You will come last.
John was only 9 years old when he got the devastating news that the man that had raised him his whole life, that he thought was his father, was really not his biological father. You see, John's parents had been having marital difficulties about the time that John was conceived, and John's mom stepped out on his dad and had an affair with an old boy.
She belongs to the streets.
Well, the result was that she got pregnant. Didn't tell anybody, even her husband,
304.
who began to raise John as his own, thinking that that was his child. Well, as the child got older, he began to look like that old boyfriend. People started talking, asking questions. Well, the old boyfriend did too. The old boyfriend decided he was going to file a petition asking the court to allow him to have a DNA test.
Pookie wanted his baby.
He was, in fact, a biological father. But the court refused to establish the parent-child relationship between him and John because of the length of time and because of the relationship that had already been established in the bond between the legal father, the one that had been raising him, and John. What do you think about that?
Wow.
Mom died in a horrible car wreck, leaving a 12-year-old little girl to be raised by a father that little girl barely knew, somebody that hadn't had much at all to do with her throughout her entire life. When Mom died, Dad owed Mom about $25,000 in back child support. Well, guess what? The state pursued that. They began to collect that money for mother's estate.
Wow.
And here's where it gets crazy. Mother had a will, and in that will, mother had left every bit of her estate, everything, to another daughter, a child that was older that she had had by a previous relationship, and left none of it to the 12-year-old little girl. So now this man is raising this 12-year-old little girl. He's having to pay all of this back child support to the estate of the mother, and then the estate pays it out to another child who has nothing to do with that particular situation.
Story.
This doesn't seem fair. That's one of the craziest cases I've ever had dealing with child support.
Wow.
I cannot get you any more custody than you already have. I tell single moms of children born out of wedlock that all the time. In Tennessee, if you're a single mom of a child born out of wedlock, you have sole and exclusive custody of that child. You have sole and exclusive decision-making authority. You can decide when and even if the other parent gets to see that child. Now, many times mothers in that situation will call me up and say, hey, I want a parenting schedule from the court giving the father parenting time, a set schedule, because he's bugging the heck out of me to see the kids. And I tell moms, I say, you may not want to do that. You would be giving your authority to the court to make that decision. Right now, you're the sole and exclusive decision maker.
Lenley, which side are you on?
Stirring up a hornet's nest. You may not want to rock the boat because the court, in some situations, could even change custody and give custody to the father. You may not want that to happen. Be satisfied with what you got. Bob had a girlfriend, which would normally be a good thing, except Bob was married. The wife found out about the girlfriend, and about 2 months later, Bob was out of the house in the apartment with the girlfriend. Wife had filed for divorce. About 6 months later, the case was set for mediation. Now, interestingly enough, negotiations had gone really well up to this point, and both attorneys thought the case was going to settle in mediation. So Bob's wife went to the mediation with her attorney, and Bob went to the mediation with his attorney and his girlfriend. Blew up. Why in the world he thought that would be a good thing or be beneficial to him, I don't know. But the mediation lasted about 30 minutes and fell apart.
She didn't like that coffee.
Negotiations back by 2 or 3 months. I don't know why people think that it's okay to bring your boyfriend or girlfriend to the mediation, court hearing, child support hearings when you're going through a divorce. That does nothing but fuel the flames. Dad is ordered to pay child support of $650 a month. Well, Dad loses his job and gets behind by a couple of months. So what does Mom do? She files a contempt petition against Dad. It's set 30 days out.
Evil.
Dad hires a lawyer, goes to court. He's found in contempt because he's behind. He's ordered to pay a $1,000 purge payment. That really makes Dad mad. You know why? Because a couple of years before that, Mom had denied Dad his parenting time for 3 times in a row, 3 weeks in a row. And Dad took Mom to court. You know how long it took to get that hearing? It took about a year before the court let Dad have a hearing on his contempt. You know what happened when he had the contempt hearing? You think Mom went to jail? No.
Of course not.
Slap on the wrist. That doesn't seem fair, does it?
No.
Dad was livid. Dad asked the question, if I get behind on child support, I'm treated like a criminal.
You go to jail.
If Mom denies me parenting time in violation of the order, she gets a slap on the wrist. It's just not fair. It was Dad's weekend to have parenting time. But Mom called Dad up and said, hey, you can't see your kids this weekend. I know it's your weekend, but we got plans. Dad said, what are you talking about? Mom said, we got plans. You can't see your kids this weekend. Sorry, click. Dad was furious. Monday morning, Dad hired a lawyer. The lawyer filed a contempt petition against Mom for Mom denying Dad his parenting time in violation of the order. The case went to trial. At trial, Mom won. You know why? Because Dad never
she's a woman.
To pick his kids up.
Oh,
you see, Dad had every other weekend, Friday from 6 p.m. to Sunday at 6 p.m. Had Dad gone to pick the kid up at 6 p.m. on Friday, as is ordered and as is his scheduled time, and Mom had then denied him parenting time, then he would have won that case. But just because Mom called him on Wednesday and told him that he couldn't have parenting time, didn't necessarily mean he couldn't have parenting time. What Dad should have done is gone and tried to pick the kid up Friday at 6.
Free game.
I was in court the other day waiting my turn, and I was listening to the judge make a ruling in a custody case. There was a mother and a father. They had gone through a divorce, and the judge was about to rule on the custody issue. They had one child, about 5 years old. Mom was about 29. Dad was probably about the same age, maybe a little bit older. Well, when the judge made his ruling, he gave Dad primary residential parent status. Dad had 245 days and mom had 120 days. Mom jumped up and yelled out at the judge, "How could you take my child away from me? That's my child." I got to thinking about that.
Sounds about right.
Was that really her child for the judge to take away? What about Dad? Was that his child too? One of the parents was going to get primary residential parent status in this case. What if it had been Mom that had gotten that? Would Dad have stood up and yelled out the same thing?
No.
I doubt it. I think there's still a presumption in this country that moms are the ones that should have custody of their kids. And when they don't, somehow that means the court's taking the kid away.
Lindley keeping it real.
Should money that you receive as inheritance be considered income for child support purposes? In the state of Tennessee, as in many states, child support is based on the relative income of the parties. Party that makes more money than the other party may end up paying more in child support because of those higher earnings. Well, what about a person who inherits money from perhaps their father, their mother, their aunt, their uncle? Should that money be used to determine income for child support purposes? Well, that case came up before the Tennessee Court of Appeals not too long ago, and the answer is yes. You have to include that as income. It's considered a gift, and gifts are included in income for child support purposes. The question then becomes, how do you allocate it? How do you spread it out over time? And that's a difficult question. But the short answer is you got to include it in income for child support purposes. You know, people really don't change. They really don't. Your husband, your wife, your baby's mama, your baby's daddy is the same person today that they were when you first met them, unless you met them as an infant. But once a person goes through puberty, they pretty much have developed who they're going to be for the rest of their lives. Yeah, you know, they may drink a little bit more. They may start using drugs that they didn't use before, but they always had that propensity. And you may not have seen it, but you're stuck with that now.
Speaking
I can't
facts.
tell you how many cases I have where people tell me, well, he changed or she changed. No, they really didn't. You just didn't see the true them when you first met them, first fell in love with them, first married them,
Talk that talk, Lindley.
with them, whatever. So keep that in mind. The person that you are looking at across the table when you're getting a divorce is the same person that you met, married, or had a baby with. The parents had agreed on everything: parenting time, division of property, and child support. And the child support they agreed on was that neither one of them would pay child support to the other parent. They both had equal parenting time. The problem was Dad made substantially more than Mom. And even though Mom didn't want child support from Dad, the court disagreed. The court said under the law, Mom has to receive child support.
So the court can
Dad,
make you
even though they have
pay,
equal time.
even though she doesn't want it.
Does it? Well, here's the deal. In Tennessee,
Unbelievable.
which is where this case happened, we have an income shares child support model. That means that the court's going to take into consideration the income of both parents and the parenting time that each parent has. Now, if both parents were making the same amount of money and had equal parenting time, there would be zero child support. But if you change any one of those two factors, then there's going to be child support paid to one parent or the other. And it doesn't matter whether you have equal parenting time. Always keep a calendar. I had another calendar case the other day. That's a case where somebody has kept a calendar of significant events that happen, usually parenting events.
Free game.
In this case, it was the mother of a child who had been keeping up with all of the days that Dad did not exercise parenting time according to the order. Days that he brought the child home early, weekends that he didn't exercise, or that he brought the kids home a day early. Turns out Dad had missed about 30 days of parenting time. He had been awarded 95 days in the parenting agreement that the parties had reached. Child support was based on that. Well, in this case, Mom was able to show the court that Dad was not exercising the 90 or 100 days that they had agreed to, and so the court knocked the number of days down to what he was actually exercising and ended up increasing child support. Folks, keep a calendar. Keep a calendar of all of those events because it'll come in handy if you got to go to court. Boom, just like that, the judge took the kids away from both parents. No time to argue, no time to debate, no time to go back and undo what had been done. Here's what happened. Both parties were so at each other, slinging mud in the courtroom, calling each other names. The judge had had enough. So what she did is she said, you guys don't have any business, either one of you, with these kids right now. Until this divorce is over and we can get these matters settled,
I'm going to give the kids to whichever set of grandparents is more fit and wants the kids. And that's what the judge did. Let me tell you something. That case settled in about a week, and it settled in mediation. The judge probably did the right thing. Legally, probably not. If we had appealed it, which would have taken months, we probably would have won that appeal. But the judge knew what she was doing. She was putting the parties in a position where they had no choice but to either settle or lose their kids. Mary's mom became sick and had to have 24-hour care. Mary was the one that ended up giving her that care. Mary was 35. She had a 6-year-old little boy with John. John was the boy's father. When Mary went to put John on child support, Mary argued that, hey, I haven't got any income, I don't have a job, and I can't work because I'm taking care of my mom. Now, normally when a parent who's able to work isn't working, the court will impute income to that person. And that's important because the court looks at the income of both parties in order to determine what child support's going to be. Well, in this case, Mary used a little known and little used provision in the child support guidelines to be excused from working. She's a caregiver for a family member. Therefore, the court excused her from working and did not impute income to her. Now, here's where it doesn't seem fair. John ended up having to pay more in child support because of that. Just doesn't seem fair, does it?
Wow.
Dad had stopped paying child support when the kid was 13 years old.
Horrific.
Kid's now 26 years old. He turned 18 8 years ago. Well, Dad had forgotten about it. He didn't pay. Mom didn't come after him. Dad figured it was a dad issue. Well, all of a sudden, Mom hired an attorney and filed a petition for contempt against Dad for the money that he didn't pay between the time the son was 13 and the time he was 18. And that amounted to about $60,000. So now Dad's looking at paying $60,000 in arrears plus interest, which by that time made it about $120,000. Plus he was facing a contempt petition. You know, the thing is, there's not really a statute of limitations on the collection of past due child support in a lot of states. Some states do have a statute of limitations on that. You got to check your state on that. But the best thing you can do is to pay your child support when it's due and the way you're supposed to pay it. Jennifer had a baby. Problem is, she's married. Usually that would
Jennifer is a 304.
Usually that's what you would want. However, in this situation, the baby is not her husband's. That causes some real issues and some real problems. As a matter of fact, Jenny and her husband have been separated for about 6 years. She's gone on with her life, he's gone on with his life. For whatever reason, they just never took that step.
A lot of plot twists to this story.
Maybe it was religion, maybe it was money, whatever the reason, they never did that. Now she's pregnant by somebody else. But the law considers that child to be her husband's child. The only way to change that is to go through a divorce process, to have DNA tests performed that exclude her husband as being the father of that child. And then you still have to go the extra step of proving that it would be in the best interest of that child to disestablish paternity, legal paternity, in her husband. That's a difficult, time-consuming, and expensive process. That's a lie. She's lying. That never happened. That's what my client did in open court. Stood up right behind me, scared me to death. Yelled that out. His wife had just testified that he had pulled up Friday night to pick up their son, and when she came out to tell him that their son was sick and couldn't go to visitation, he pulled out a gun, pointed it at her, and said, "Give me my damn son." She called the cops, but he left before they got there. That was the behavior of an irrational, angry person. Well, guess what the judge just saw? Behavior of an irrational, angry person. Who do you think she's going to believe? Well, you know the answer to that. You know, if you just sat still, which is what you got to do in court in situations like that,
maintain
and let me handle the situation, I could have found out whether she was lying. I would have fired off about 10 rapid-fire questions during cross-examination. Then I would have moved on and asked some other benign questions, and then come back later to those first 10 questions. And if there was a conflict in her answers between the two times, then we would know she was probably lying. Guess who just got engaged? My client's husband. That's right. She called me up the other day and she said, "Guess what I saw on Facebook?" I said, "What?" She said, "My husband has just gotten engaged and now has a fiance. And they've got pictures posted all over Facebook. She's flashing a brand new ring that he got her." Folks, that's crazy.
If you're married, don't get engaged until the divorce is final.
These dudes
That's
can't wait
nuts.
to have these women
What he
take their
did
money
was
from
he
them.
took marital funds and bought an engagement ring for his fiancée while he's still married. Well, guess what?
Clown.
Those marital funds are half his wife's, half my client's. So what's going to end up happening is he's going to have to give back to my client
Sheesh.
half the money that he spent
This
on that
coffee
ring.
smells like
Don't
shit.
do that, guys. Don't ever get engaged and buy somebody an engagement ring until you're divorced and until that divorce is final.
As an attorney, I'm often called upon to give advice in family law situations because that's the type of law that I practice. It's funny, but a lot of times people won't take my advice. They usually end up in trouble when they don't. If you're going to ask an attorney for advice, you should at least take the advice that they give you. Otherwise, you might get in trouble. Perfect example occurred a couple of months ago. I had a mother call me up. She's a mother of a 5-year-old little girl. She was divorced. It was Dad's weekend to have the little girl. Dad called up about 30 minutes ahead of time, said, I'm coming to get our daughter. Mom told the little girl and she started screaming and crying. Mom called me up. What should I do? Well, you should follow the court order. If you don't, you might get in trouble. You might get arrested. You might lose custody of your daughter. You might be in contempt of court. Well, Mom didn't take my advice for whatever reason, and she ended up with a warrant for her arrest. In that situation, she was charged with interfering with Dad's parenting time. You know, if you're going to call an attorney up and ask for advice, you ought to take the advice. So Jennifer had gotten pregnant by Steve, didn't tell Steve, told Bob. So Bob and Jennifer got married, and neither one of them told Steve, but they both knew the truth.
Evil.
And they went ahead and Bob signed the birth certificate. Well, Steve found out. He found out about 3 years later. The child started looking a lot like Steve. Some of Steve's friends and some of Jennifer's friends that they had in common told Steve about it. So he inquired and sure enough found out that that was his biological child.
Steve
He
was
hired an
busting the
attorney and
cheeks.
filed a petition to disestablish paternity in Bob and to establish paternity in himself. The court heard all the proof and ruled that Bob and Jennifer committed fraud by signing the birth certificate and not letting Steve know that he was the biological father.
Sounds fair.
The court disestablished paternity in Bob and established paternity in Steve. Do you think that was the right result? Do you think the judge could have done something different? What do you think Bob and Jennifer ought to do at this point? What effect, if any, does a divorce have on a step-parent adoption? Here's a common scenario. Mom and Dad get married. Mom already has a child from a previous relationship. Dad ends up adopting that child through a step-parent adoption. That now becomes that person's child, that father's child. Well, what happens if the parties get divorced after that? Well, Dad is either going to owe child support, have visitation, or get custody. And I've seen situations where a step-parent who has adopted their stepchild ends up getting custody of that stepchild through a divorce because mom's either using drugs or is not fit to properly care for the child. If not, if the mother gets custody of the child, then the father in that situation is going to end up paying child support for their adopted stepchild. Because when you adopt a child, that child becomes your child for all purposes, child support, inheritance, etc. Mom wanted to move with the minor child more than 1,000 miles away from Dad. Problem was, Dad played a significant role in the child's life, went to all the ball games, spent tons of time with the kid. Well, Dad would have won that case, except for one problem. Dad screwed up. Here's what happened. Mom sent what we call a relocation letter to Dad, spelling out what she wanted to do and telling Dad he had 30 days to object to the relocation. Dad did object. He sent another letter saying, I object to this. I don't want you to move with my child. That meant that Mom had to file a petition and ask the court to allow her to relocate. The judge was not going to do that, but she filed the petition anyway. Dad had 30 days to respond to that petition by law. Guess what? He failed to do that. And because he failed to respond within 30 days, the court had no choice but to let Mom move, relocate with the child.
Terrible.
Remember, if you've got a relocation case, you've got to follow the letter of the law.
Free
There's
game.
no two ways about it. In this case, Dad didn't, and the kid was allowed to move. A few years ago, I was involved in a divorce case. I was representing the wife. While that divorce was pending, but before the final decree was entered, the husband had a horrible car wreck. He was severely injured. We didn't know if he was going to survive at first. Well, he did survive, and he went out and he hired one of these big law firms that handles personal injury cases. You know who they are. You hear them on TV all day long. Well, we thought to ourselves, is he going to recover a lot of money? Looks like he probably will. He wasn't at fault. Well, we decided that that was probably marital property. And sure enough, in the state we were in, turns out it was marital property. That the proceeds from that personal injury case for an accident that occurred during the marriage, between the time the parties were married and the time the judge banged that gavel and said you're divorced, is marital property. Now, it's different in each state, so you got to check your state's law to see. But in the state we were in, that was marital property. Bob and Jennifer got married about 2 years ago. About a year and a half into the marriage, Jennifer came to Bob and told him that she was no longer happy as a woman, that she wanted to transition to a man. Bob was a little bit upset at first, but he became accepting of the idea. And
Accepting of the idea?
This coffee smells like
Bob and
shit.
her want to stay married. But what does that mean legally? Do they now have a same-sex marriage? Does it even matter? Does the law even care? Those are questions that we grapple with as lawyers. You know, there are a number of questions that have come up in the arena of same-sex marriage that the law just hasn't caught up with yet. And we're still trying to adapt, and we're still trying to decide issues that are tough issues in that area. Over the next week, we're going to talk about some of those issues. We're going to talk about some of the problems that have come up, some of the issues that have come up, and the way the courts are handling those issues, and the things that probably are going to change over the next couple of years. So stay tuned. Mom and Dad were the divorced parents of 2 kids. One of those kids just turned 18 years old and graduated from high school. Dad no longer had an obligation to pay child support for that child. Well, what Dad did is he cut his child support in half. He'd been paying about $700 a month in child support for both kids, so he figured, well, what the heck, I guess I'll pay $350 for one kid. That was the wrong move. In Tennessee, as in a lot of states, we have what's called an income share model. It's based on a somewhat sophisticated mathematical formula. But what we do know is that you can't cut child support in half in these situations because you're not paying 50% of child support for each child. Each child you have, you pay less of a percentage of income for that child than you did for the previous child. In this case, Mom filed a contempt petition against Dad, and Dad was found in contempt. What Dad should have done is petition the court and wait for the court to make a determination.
Guys, there you have it. There you have it. That's it. That's why millions and millions of men today are questioning, is marriage worth it? This is what many, many men have gone through, have to look forward to, and the majority of men will go through. Why? Because the statistics don't lie. Chances are your marriage will fail. I know you don't like that coffee. And that's why I don't blame men who look at this situation and think to themselves, is marriage worth it? And guys, this isn't coming from somebody who doesn't believe in the institution of marriage. I grew up in a 2-parent household. I saw marriage work in my home. Granted, my parents come from a whole different country, right? They knew their roles in the home and they leaned towards more traditional roles in the home, and it worked for them. And maybe that's why I personally still see value in marriage. But again, I said this in my last video, man, you'd be out of your mind. You'd be foolish to go into marriage today without protecting yourself in some form, whether it's a prenup, postnup, or maybe just not signing documents at all, staying out of states that respect common law. Whatever it is you do, whatever you have to do, I think the most important thing for men to be is informed. This video was not made to encourage you to get married or not to get married. This was made to educate. And I've done a lot of these, like attorneys speaking on these topics. It's all made to educate and probably will strengthen your beliefs no matter what they are. And let me be clear, most men do want to get married. Most men do see the value in the institution of marriage. And that's for a lot of reasons. Number one, we know that 2-parent households produce the best children, right? But of course, the vocal group will be the men who are against marriage. They're the ones who comment the most in the comment section down below. But most men want marriage. But will they get married? It depends. It's 50-50 nowadays, right? Men aren't rushing to marry women because, first of all, women, they don't want anything to do with the women, right? Long term, right? They'll bust those cheeks. They don't want anything to do with the women long term because the women aren't wives. They're in this modern mindset. They're celebrating being independent and not needing men, right? Not needing the leadership of a man, not realizing the importance of having a masculine man at that. And last but not least, I'll always say this in these type of videos is make sure that number one, you're informed and your decision, no matter what it is, no matter what you decide to do, when it comes to marriage or when it comes to how you handle your future, your romantic partner, whatever you choose, make sure it's an informed decision that you're making. Make sure you're not being pressured by any woman. Make sure you're not being pressured by family. Make sure you're not being pressured by society, some standard that says you need a wife and you need kids and you need to marry that woman who you've been dating, who you know is toxic, right? Be smart. Don't go out here and just like adopt kids and all this crazy shit we're listening to. Imagine some men have gone homeless just trying to keep up with child support. Imagine that some men have been forced to work jobs that they otherwise would retire from or just would quit, right? Just for peace of mind. Maybe that job wasn't something that they enjoyed, but now they have to work it because if they stop working it, they're going to go to jail because even if they quit, they will still count that as your current income because you're capable of working. And so now you're forced to work till that kid is 21 and is an adult, right? So you're not out of your mind if you don't see the value in marriage today. The people who are taking the biggest gamble are the people who are going to pursue it and try to protect themselves either which way they can. The people who are out of their mind for sure are people who are just saying, well, the majority of people who've tried to get married, majority of men just didn't have it right. They just didn't find the right person. This is what women will say. Well, love will fix it all. You just need the right person. We can do this. Don't think emotionally. Think about it logically. Protect yourself. Protect yourself every which way you can. Hey guys, I appreciate you for checking out this episode of The Coffee Pod. Subscribe, hit that like button, comment your thoughts down below. I'm always interested to know what you think. Until next time, man, I'm out. Peace.